Welcome back to part 2 of the Churny Shamrock Wallhanging unit. We're going to make this little quilt, and today we're going to be working on lots of half-square triangles.
Another block that we're going to be needing are a bunch of half-square triangles. And so for this exercise, we are going to be creating the larger size that will go around the outer perimeter with our 9-patch units. So what I have here to make the larger half-square triangle units, I have 2 pieces, a background fabric, and I've chosen a white fabric with little black plus signs. And I have my green piece, and these are both cut at 5.5 inches. They're going to finish at 4.5 inches before they're sewn into the, they're going to finish at 5 inches, and when sewn into the quilt, they're going to be 4.5 inches. So I've added 1 inch to my finished size, which that would be the 4.5 inch. So I cut them 5.5 inches. So now what I'm going to do is draw a line from diagonal to diagonal, and I like to use the Frixion pins for this. They will iron off with heat. Before I press it, I do a heat set and the ink goes away, but it is on the back side of the quilt, so it doesn't really matter. But it does have a really fine tip, and I like that for creating a nice crisp line. So we'll just draw right there like that. Okay, and then we're going to sew on both sides of that line. And we're going to put that right in there. And I do tend to sew this foot that I have on this machine. The edge is not quite a 1/4 inch, so it's kind of a scant. So I do use that as my guide. So my seam here is going to be maybe a scant 1/4 inch. But we're going to go right along. We're going to turn this, and I'm going to just pull my threads out a little bit and come right back down the other side. Okay, and cut those threads, and then what I have then is essentially 2 half-square triangle units that when we cut them apart, we'll have 2 separate pieces. So let's go ahead and go to the cutting table. Okay, at the cutting table, we're going to go ahead and take our ruler and place it on that drawn line, and we're going to go ahead and cut right on that. So now we do have our two units, and I'm going to do a quick finger press here, and I'm pressing to the print side or the green side like that, and I'm going to take them and give them a quick press. Okay, so now they're a little bit flatter, and these are oversized. So now we're going to trim them down to the size that we're going to need, and we're going to be trimming them to 5 inches. And I'm going to use a block lock ruler. These are pretty awesome. They have this ridge in there. It's like a cutout, and it locks right into your seam, and it holds it nice and flat. And what I'm going to do here is line it up. And I don't have that much to trim off. So I'm going to just make sure that here are my 5-inch lines, and I'm making sure that my piece extends a little bit beyond that because I do want to trim on the other side as well. So we're going to go ahead and trim this side and right along the top. Okay, and then with this ruler, it's kind of handy. You can just turn the unit like that. Now I'm going to slide that along my seam so that now it lines up here to the 5-inch on both sides. That looks good. And there again, I'm just trimming off a little bit. If you like to make sure that you have a little bit more to trim off, or you want to work with a little bit more fabric here so that you can cut it down to size, you could make your blocks a little bit bigger than the 5.5 inches that we started with. So cut them maybe 5 3/4 inch, and then you would have a bunch more to trim up. But at least then you know for sure that you've got a good coverage of the 5 inches, because you do need this to be 5 inches square when it is trimmed up before we sew it into the quilt. And then for this one, I'm going to use just a regular ruler, and it does have the diagonal line. And again, I want this to be 5 inches. So I'm going to do the same concept. I'm going to line that diagonal line right up there on that seam. And what that's going to do is it's going to make sure that in my corner is exactly where the joins meet. And that's going to help give me a better point on my quilt top when it's all finished. So get that lined up, hold it in place, and we're going to trim on 2 sides again. Okay, and then we're going to flip our block and trim the other 2 sides. And line that line up along the seam. Make sure I'm at 5 inches both directions here. Hold that into place and trim off those 2 sides. So I did not trim very much at all. There's just a little bit. So again, if you like to trim off a little bit more just to make sure that you have enough to trim down to the size, then start off with your blocks just a little bit bigger, your squares, before you sew the diagonal line and cut them apart. So we are going to go ahead and make a bunch of these. There's going to be 24 5-inch half square triangle units. And again, use a bunch of different greens. I did keep my background print the same in all of them, and have fun playing with the different green shades and scraps that you have. The next little block section that we're going to be making of our shamrock quilt is going to be the leaf parts of our shamrock. So to do that, we're going to need some background pieces and some various green prints again. So we're going to start with making some half square triangles, and I have my background fabrics on another board just where they're all nice and flat. I got scrappy little pieces, and I'm going to go through the pieces first because I know I'm going to need 2.5-inch squares. So I have 2 squares here, and let's just see what those happen to measure. And I'm going to get my smaller ruler here and put that on there, and they just happen to be 2.5 inches. So I'm going to use those. And then I'm going to need, per shamrock little petal block that we're going to be doing, we need 2 of the background 2.5-inch squares, and then 2 different green 2.5-inch squares. So I'm just going to pick through my stack. I've got a couple strips here. This one looks like it might be 2.5, so let's check. Oh, that is perfect. So we're going to make one like this. And then we're going to use this green, and I'm going to cut 2.5-inch square from here. Okay. And this is going to, the reason I cut 2 for one block is because I want them to be different little corners, but you could do them both the same. But in all, you are going to need 12 of these half square triangle units. So, to make 12 of those, you'll need 6 background 2.5-inch and 6 various green squares that are 2.5 inches. And we're going to make those right sides together to make half square triangle units, just like we did with the larger ones. We're going to do the exact same thing with the small ones. So we can go ahead and line those up. And I'm going to draw a diagonal line on those. Okay, and so just from corner to corner, I'll place my crisp pin line on there so I can see it. Whoops. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and stitch on both sides of that drawn line approximately 1/4 inch away. And I'm going to go do that quick at the sewing machine, and I'll meet you right back here. Okay, those have been sewn, and let's go ahead and cut that apart. So we're going to cut right there on our drawn line. So we have 2 sections, and we'll press those again so that the seam goes towards the green side. They're just cute little half square triangles. And we are going to square these up so they are 2 inches. And so I have a smaller block lock ruler here that I'm going to place. I'm going to lock that seam right in place there and make sure that I have my fabrics extending beyond my 2-inch lines here. That way I know I have stuff left to trim after I've trimmed up this side. So we're going to do this side and the top, and then we're just going to flip that around and move it right along to the 2-inch line there, the 2-inch line here, and give the other 2 lines a trim along those 2 edges. And there we have a 2-inch half square triangle unit. And we're going to be making 12 of these that will go into the rest of the petal unit. So we'll set these aside. I'll trim this one up as well. And I'm going to use a regular ruler for this. Again, I'm placing my diagonal line on the ruler right along that seam, making sure that it extends a little bit past the 2 inches so that I can trim on all 4 sides, and cut 2 sides. And we'll just turn that block, place my ruler back on it. Here I'm going to line up the diagonal line and then the 2-inch lines here and here, and we'll trim off those 2 sides, and then you have your completed units. Okay, we're going to add those together with a bunch more of our green 2-inch squares, and the unit that we're going to be making is going to be kind of like how we did on our 9 patches, but we're going to make, I'll call it a 6 patch. So we're going to pick out some different fabrics here. Here's a different one, okay? And we actually need 2 rows of 3, and on our last row of 3 we're going to place a center green and then our half square triangles. And here again I'd like to use 2 different ones, but these just happen to be the same. I'm going to do a row with 2 half square triangles so that the backgrounds are pointing out, the greens are pointing into the rest of the greens, and then a row of 3 green 2-inch squares to another row of 3 green 2-inch squares. So I'm going to piece that together just like I did on our 9 patch blocks, and we'll see what that looks like when it's all done. Okay, this is our completed unit, and it's going to measure 5 inches before we sew it into the quilt. And it has 6 plus 1 up top here, so 7 2-inch green squares of various shades of green, and then 2 half square triangles, 1 on each side here, that complete our little rounded shamrock look. And we're going to need to make 6 of these blocks that go into the center for the leaves of our shamrock.